And as well, we have developed in cardiovascular disease the ability to intervene if it is very late in 83-year-olds with advanced congestive heart failure. We've been able to do this in the latter half of the 20th century with our hearts. The 21st century, we will do it for our minds and our brains. Thankfully, the science has now accumulated to suggest that such a vision is not folly. That despite how old we are, our brains continue to have the capacity both for us to continue to build more nerve cells or neurons, and those neurons that we have continue to have the capacity to become more efficient by building more connections with other neurons. And this is an area of great scientific inquiry right now around the world. So we have a good reason to believe that some of the things you've heard about this morning at least have a sound theoretical rationale for why it's never too late to try to improve brain functioning. We also know, and I find this is quite sobering to many audiences who appreciate it for the first time, that while we have focused so heavily on Alzheimer's disease as a disease of older people, that's only because the clinical symptoms express themselves in old age. The evidence is mounting that Alzheimer's disease has its roots many years before the onset of symptoms. And while today we may conceive of the treatment of Alzheimer's disease, or even the diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease, as something we do for our parents, quite frankly, I believe that where our field is headed is someday the diagnosis and treatment of Alzheimer's disease will be people closer to my age. Not because the disease is more common in people my age, but because we've done a better job at developing that EKG, that stethoscope, that echocardiogram for the brain, so that we can identify these changes before the onset of advanced brain failure, which essentially is what the clinical syndrome of Alzheimer's disease is, at least in my view. This is one slide to just share with you, kind of evidence that's been emerging to suggest that what I just said is not science fiction. And that is, you can take two groups of people, one group that has a clearly identified genetic risk factor for the development of Alzheimer's disease in later life called the ApoE4 allele, and you can subject both people with that genetic risk factor as well as people without the genetic risk factor to our version of the cardiovascular stress test, but this is a brain stress test, where patients with the gene and without the gene, they're not patients, they're healthy, they will perform normally on the task, but those with the gene, and these are young people, those with the gene show a different pattern of how hard their brain has to work in order to get the right answer than those without the gene. And these are not people that are suffering from the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. In our setting at the Reichman Research Institute at Baycrest in Toronto, where I moved about 18 months ago from Princeton, New Jersey, where I was before, our focus on brain fitness is clearly on developing technologies to help us with preclinical diagnostics, to be able to someday contribute to what will be the development of a stethoscope for the brain, as well as the EKG machine. We are also very much focused on doing what my colleagues to the left of me are doing, and that is maximizing our cognitive abilities throughout the lifespan. And we're focusing most of our science on executive functioning, which is a particular cognitive realm, which we believe is primarily that cognitive realm most sensitive to the effects of normal aging. And it has such a tremendous impact, executive functioning, on so many other cognitive realms, including memory, which we've been emphasizing a lot today in our discussion with regard to training programs, gaming, and the like. The goal, obviously, is for all of us to maintain our functional independence, and perhaps more important than being independent, to maintain our autonomy, so that no matter how old we get, we can always make decisions for ourselves. We may become so sufficiently frail that we need other people to help care for us, but we want to at least be the choreographers of how that care is delivered. We don't want to give up autonomy.